start the ball rolling.
It's just a comment on the peer-to-peer. I too joined TEC in Brisbane, and they were in the end we both said no because their values, there was a big values mismatch, even though the experience was fantastic, and but they were really thinking that somewhere along the TEC's thinking that they would come up with a model that had a lot of values that would support social enterprises because, probably a lot of the corporate people here, in my experience when we've had mentors come to Food Connect, the mentors have got way more out of the relationship than we have, particularly around the area of humbleness, that the pure fact that we're out there doing stuff. But TEC was that peer-to-peer structure. If someone could create that, Westpac or someone could create that, not Westpac themselves, fund something like that. And my biggest experience and the greatest thing working with social traders, David, was when Darryl worked with us with all the Food Connects around Australia trying to aggregate something around the software systems for us. He was very collaborative and very encouraging around how do we get you guys together to participate, to actually think about this. Even though it didn't end up as a great result, just that whole idea of just allowing us to get together, or Emma to fly down to Melbourne and Julian and all those people to sit together was really empowering. So I think and there'll be other social enterprises in the space as well that for many, many years, those have been in us for a while, it sometimes can be, we, on our hands and knees, and because they've got the money, we tend to sort of say yes to everything they say, coming from a mentorship relationship, and then at the end of the day, we all sort of sit around and go, well, bugger me, we actually knew a lot more than them, and we're actually really good, and we really know what we are on about, and we need to actually just be empowered, or something needs to be facilitated around us that actually allows us to go from strength to the next strength, rather than sort of feeling like we're idiots. Because when you do go to the TEC, all those people who you thought were pretty impressive in terms of their businesses, they're sitting there saying, I struggle with HR, or I struggle with, talking to my bank manager or whatever else. So, yeah.
Robert, is this on? I think you also, in your comment, you raise another really important point in the context of capacity building, and that's the why of capacity building. And in social enterprises, the why relates to the impact, to the mission, to the vision, to the values, and that's different in a commercial setting. The why we're doing this is different. In a commercial setting, it's shareholder profit, it's business owner profit, it's the pursuit of wealth. I'm not saying businesses are values free, don't want to be misinterpreted, but the fundamental motivations are different. So I can see why in the tech group shared with Ingrid before, the enormous discord I often feel internally while I'm sitting in that group, but I'm punishing myself.
Just a scale question. Obviously, if you sort of the funds yesterday, I think there was 400 or 500 each, and if you add them all up and assume there's some similar ones, there might be 1,000 enterprises sort of kicking around looking for money, some investment ready. If we took scale and say, hey, in the next 3 or 4 years, we need 10,000 or 15,000 in Australia, how do we make the scale jump? In not taking 50 years to get there, because even if you sort of net out the money, it might be $1 billion going into the sector, which is still a fraction of even what goes into the not-for-profit sector. How do we make a leap from a few hundred to 10, 12, 15,000 in the next 5, 7 years? What's required to just scale up the sector?
I don't know if I should answer this question first, because I actually have a particular view about scale. I think we're having a dangerous conversation about scale if we're just talking about scale for scale's sake. I don't think scale equals impact. We've demonstrated that it doesn't in the not-for-profit sector, and it's not necessarily going to be any different in the social enterprise sector. I take your point, however, that scale is much more investable. If we look at the SME sector, the SMEs who are investable are much more in the M part of the SME equation. I think we need to start having different conversations about scale that look at different models rather than what I call the watermelon model of everyone just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, to start looking at distributed scale, depth, as well as growth, all of those sort of conversations. I'm not sure in the Australian context that we're yet having those deep conversations.
I was going to say, let's leave the individual enterprise scale question aside. I was more thinking if you want to keep it small and distributed, how do we get 15,000 social enterprises to meet the need? Leave aside whether some of them turn into really large organizations, but we're playing on the fringes as a sector. And there's so many needs that need to get solved that we're just not getting there, and we're taking it at a snail's pace. How do we move this thing forward in a significant way?
I mean, I concur with Ingrid's comments. I think, and you talked about it in your presentation, the other part to that, well, the other answer to that question is in the ecosystem. So, you know, what we have, I don't know if anyone's read that report done at Skoll from fragmentation to function. I don't know if anyone's read it, but if you haven't, do. It's really a bit kind of, don't read it before you're trying to go to bed at night because you'll fall asleep. It's dense, but it actually is really good in the sense that it actually nails down those issues of ecosystem, and actually what we're working in at the moment is a fragmented market, and in that context the idea of building new enterprises to solve problems that aren't being solved is a challenge, because all the things that help those enterprises to establish and grow up are not necessarily supported, or if they are, they're supported in an ad hoc kind of fashion. So I don't know the answer, but I guess the challenge in it is really around how intermediaries get better and better at what they do. As Ingrid said, how investors start to properly calibrate their appetite for risk to the real risks in the market, that we might see actually, and probably need to see more early stage models of investment, you know, sort of venture capital style stuff for this sector, that ecosystem growing up really.
Yeah, look, just briefly, I agree with those comments. I think, you know, from our perspective, I think what's been, you know, sort of really highlighted over the last day and a half, and what we've been saying for a while is that, you know, that there is this gap between, you know, in some ways that the dollars are available, but there is, you know, I think a big gap in terms of the capacity building part of the ecosystem. And so, you know, I think, you know, there needs to be investment in capacity building. We'd like to, you know, from Social Traders' perspective, like to sort of scale some of the work that we're doing, which, you know, in the first 2 or 3 years was largely confined to Victoria. But we're now, you know, we're actually starting to expand that program to other parts of Australia with support from our corporate partners and philanthropy and from state governments. And so I think, you know, those sort of those sectors are starting to realise the importance of investing in capacity building and you know, bridging that gap as well.
I've got a microphone, so I'm going to start talking. My name's David, I'm from Parramatta City Council. So firstly, a plug for Social Enterprises Sydney, which is a capacity building organisation based mainly in Western Sydney, but for all of Sydney. So if you're a Sydney-based enterprise, that's what this is the space they're trying to fill. Secondly, Parramatta Council offers a range of grants for social enterprises and has for a number of years, and we've changed that over time when we realised that our grants should be helping to get people ready for trade and sustainability and investment rather than grant cycle. But can I ask you to comment on the value of grants as a, particularly when focused on capacity building in those early years?
I think it's quite interesting to watch what's happening in other places as well in terms of this, because I actually think that grants and philanthropy has a really important role to play in terms of the investment readiness piece. If we have a look at the UK, they've realised through their pipeline work, that unless they put in some capacity building and investment readiness money in the form of grants, they're not actually going to achieve that scale that you're talking about. So, the fact that they've developed now investment readiness fund and a contract readiness fund, because that's the other piece. We often dissociate, the investment side of things from, say, the social procurement side of things. We actually need to bring them together because, one's talking about income, one's talking about asset development. They're important parts of the puzzle. So I think absolutely we need to start thinking about how are we going to fund capacity building into the future, because without it we don't have the pipelines.
Yeah, look, I think our experience is in terms of this question of sort of grant versus sort of loan financing, that the financing has to be tailored to to the needs and capability, financial capability of the organisation. So, for organisations that come through the crunch and we that have the opportunity to pitch to social traders and to other investors, our approach is always to look at the particular needs of that enterprise, and quite often there will be a non-repayable sort of component in that financing mix, but there is always a loan component as well. But I think these hybrid forms of finance we feel are quite critical, particularly at the sort of start-up and early stage for a lot of social enterprises.
Given that we're self-facilitating, aren't we clever? We actually only have 2 more minutes of this session left before we would be chewing into the next session.
I'll hand over the microphone to Jeanette then.
Jeanette Large from Women's Property Initiatives, and we're one of the very lucky organisations that had our social enterprise idea accepted by social traders to go through the crunch process. So I suppose I just wanted to say the importance for us of going through that capacity building 6 months, absolutely intense 6 months. The fact that we were provided with a small grant to be able to put to whatever we wanted, and in our case it was to backfill for a worker, so we were able to allocate a worker to concentrate solely on the capacity building that was required. But our idea was a wonderful idea, but going through the crunch process and the market research, the feasibility, the benchmarking, the financial modelling, the mentors that we were linked in with, the whole process. I couldn't speak more highly of that capacity building process to get us to the stage of being able to pitch for the investment that we needed to get our social enterprise off the ground, and really to look at from what we started, what we put to social traders in the beginning of what we wanted our social enterprise to be, actually progressed and developed. We want money to build more housing in our organisation, so we need to make a lot of profit. We went in saying we're just going to do property management because that's our capability. It was very clear we need to do sales as well to create the profit that we need. So all of those, that whole process that we went through, I just couldn't speak more highly of it. But also that peer mentoring, we had mentoring, but we've also now been linked into some peers in the real estate industry, again through social traders, because they did extra due diligence before they decided to invest in us. And part of that was a real estate person who we linked in with him. He's now linked us into other people in the real estate area who are so generous in what they're providing us with all of that sort of now peer. And as David said, the ongoing support that we feel that we'll be getting from social traders once we've launched and ongoing afterwards. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks, Jeanette. I'm going to do a Tony Jones and say we'll take that as a comment. I've always wanted to say that. Is there a Twitter feed down here? There's one question, one down the back there, and then we might have to conclude. It's a topic we could run a whole conference on.
Howdy, Avis here, I guess it was to mirror kind of something that Robert was saying earlier. Is we've been talking a lot about very formal support, which a lot of the time when people are starting enterprises, they're kind of doing it on the side of a job. They're really busy. One of the things I discovered as the capacity catalyst for this event was that everyone's as fucking busy as I am, and it's really difficult to find time. And so, one of the things that I have found has been really valuable is that peer-to-peer mentoring, and I know that I've gotten a whole lot out of just being surrounded by other enterprises. And one of the things we've done is myself and a number of other enterprises actually share a space, and it's a really informal way of having capacity building. So there's now 5 social businesses sharing a space in Martin Place. Start Some Good are one of them, and it's been really one of the most valuable things that has happened, because we have this amazing space. We can have interns and volunteers come in, we can work together, and it's kind of like having a permanent advisory board and psychologist at your ready at any stage that you need. And I think we can talk as much as we want about formal training, but I think one of the things that you can never underestimate is just being constantly surrounded by people who are in it at the same time as you and messing up and making mistakes, and they come down, and when you're like freaking out and crying in the corner, they'll be like, it's okay, I did that yesterday. And I think just getting together in a group and getting a space, and we managed to get our space for free, and we just cover the costs of the bills, right? And it's not that hard to do. We're all kind of quite entrepreneurial, and I think that's been the most valuable thing that I think has happened to me in recent years. So yeah, go do that. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that it reinforces very much that peer-to-peer experience. Thank you all. I know we could continue
Sandy,
on, but
should we wind up, Sandy?
We should wind up. We need to swap over. Thank you all, and yeah.